Jules worked quietly, ignoring Vivenna and pulling another stitch tight. Claude's guts, intestines, stomach, and some other things Vivenna didn't want to identify, lay on the floor beside him, carefully pulled out and arranged so that they could be repaired. Jules was working on the intestines at the moment, sewing with a special thick thread and curved needle. It was gruesome. And yet, it didn't really affect Vivenna, not after the shock she'd had earlier. They were in the safe house. Tonk Fa had gone to scout the regular house to see if Parlin was all right. Denth was downstairs fetching something. Vivenna sat on the floor. She'd changed to a long dress purchased on the way. Her skirt was filthy from its time in the mud, and she sat with legs pulled up against her chest. Jules continued to ignore Vivenna, working atop a sheet on the floor.
Ow, you stupid thing! Oh, I can't believe we let you get hurt like this just to protect her.
Hurt? Did that even mean anything to a creature like Claude? He was awake. She could see that his eyes were open. What was the point of sewing up his insides? Would they heal? He didn't need to eat. Why bother with intestines? Vivenna looked away. She felt in a way as if her own insides had been ripped out, exposed for the world to see.
I'm half tempted just to leave. You and I, go away.
Claude began to shuffle, and Vivenna opened her eyes to see him trying to stand up, even though his insides were hanging out.
Lie back down. Howl of the sun. Go inactive. Howl of the sun.
Vivenna watched as Claude lay down, then stopped moving.
They might obey commands, but they aren't very smart. It tried to walk out, obeying Jules' apparent command to go away.
And what was that nonsense Jules had said about the sun? Was that one of the security phrases Denth had mentioned? Denth came over and handed Jules something that looked like a large wineskin. The woman took it and immediately turned back to her work. Denth walked over and sat down beside Vivenna.
They say a man doesn't know himself until he faces death for the first time. I don't know about that. It seems to me that the person you are when you're about to die isn't as important as the person you are during the rest of your life. Why should a few moments matter more than an entire lifetime? Everyone gets scared, Princess. Even brave men sometimes run their first time they see battle. In armies, that's why there's so much training. The ones who hold aren't the courageous ones. They're the well-trained ones. We have instincts like any other animal. They take over sometimes. That's all right. You did well, actually. Kept your wits about you, didn't freeze, found the quickest way out. I've protected some people who will just stand there and die unless you shake them and force them to run.
I want you to teach me awakening.
Do you want to think about that a bit first?
I have. I thought I was stronger than I am. I thought I'd rather die than use it. That was a lie. In that moment, I would have done anything to survive.
You'd make a good mercenary.
It's wrong, but I can't claim to be pure anymore. I might as well understand what I have. Use it. If that damns me, then so be it. At least it will have helped me survive long enough to destroy the Halandran.
You want to destroy them now, eh? No more simple sabotage and undermining.
I want this kingdom overthrown. Just like the slumlords said. It can corrupt those poor people. It can corrupt even me. I hate it. No, Denth. I really hate it. I've always hated this people. They took my childhood. I had to prepare, become their queen, get ready to marry their god king. Everyone said he was unholy and a heretic, yet I was supposed to have sex with him. I hate this entire city with its colours and its gods. I hate the fact that it stole away my life, then demanded that I leave behind all that I love. I hate the busy streets, the placating gardens, the commerce and the suffocating weather. I hate their arrogance most of all, thinking they could push my father around, force him into that treaty 20 years ago. They've controlled my life, dominated it, ruined it, and now they have my sister. I want them to hurt Denth. The attack today wasn't about subduing a rebellious element. The Halandran sent those soldiers in to kill the poor that they created. We're going to stop them from doing things like that. I don't care what it takes. I'm tired of being pretty and nice and ignoring ostentation. I want to do something.
All right. We'll change course. Start making our attacks a little more painful.
Good.
Vivenna squeezed her eyes shut, feeling frustrated, wishing that she was strong enough to keep all of these emotions away. But she wasn't. She kept them in too long. That was the problem.
This was never about your sister, was it? Coming here.
Vivenna shook her head, eyes still shut.
Why then?
I had trained all of my life. I was the one who would sacrifice herself. When Ciri left in my place, I became nothing. I had to come and get it back.
But you just said you've always hated Halandrin.
I have, and I do. That's why I had to come.
Too complicated for a mercenary, I guess.
Vivenna opened her eyes. She wasn't sure if she understood either. She'd always kept a firm grip on her hatred, only letting it manifest in disdain for Halandrin and its ways. She confronted the hatred now, acknowledged it. Somehow, Halandrin could be loathsome, yet enticing at the same time. It was as if she knew that until she came and saw the place for herself, she wouldn't have a real focus, a real understanding, a real image of what it was that had destroyed her life. Now she understood. If her breaths would help, then she would use them, just like Lemix, just like those slumlords. She wasn't above that. She never had been. She doubted Denth would understand. Instead, Vivenna nodded toward Jules.
What is she doing?
Attaching a new muscle. One of the ones in his side got cut, sheared right through. Muscles won't work right if you just sew them together. She has to replace the whole thing.
With screws?
Right into the bone. Well, it works all right. Not perfectly, but all right. No wound can ever be perfectly fixed on a lifeless, though he will heal some. You just sew them up and pump them full of fresh Ichor alcohol. If you fix them enough times, the body will stop working right, and then you'll have to spend another breath to keep them going. And by then, it is usually just best to buy another body.
He fought well. Better than the lifeless that the city guard was using.
They're not all equal. Most lifeless, they're just made of whatever body happens to be around. If you pay good money, you can get one who was very skillful in life.
Skill? They keep it?
Some semblance of it, at least. Considering what we paid for this guy, he must have been quite a soldier. And that's why it's worth the money, time and trouble to repair him, rather than buy a new lifeless. Though he'll kind of heal, it's best to use something strong in the repair, so the wound doesn't rip apart again.
And the juice?
Ichor alcohol, discovered by the 5 scholars. Wonderful stuff. Keeps a lifeless going really well.
That's what let the mini-war occur. Getting the mixture right?
That's part of it. That and the discovery, again by one of the 5 scholars, I forget which one, of some new commands. If you really want to be an Awakener, Princess, that's what you have to learn. The commands.
Teach me.
To the side, Jules got out a small pump and attached a small hose to a little valve at the base of Claude's neck. She began to pump the Ichor alcohol, moving the pump very slowly, probably in order to keep from bursting the blood vessels.
Well, there are a lot of commands. If you want to bring a rope to life, like that one you tried to use back in the alleyway, a good command is hold things. Speak it with a clear voice, willing your breath to act. If you do it right, the rope will grab whatever is closest. Protect me is another good one, though it can be interpreted in fairly strange ways if you don't imagine exactly what you want.
Imagine?
You have to form the command in your head, not just speak it. The breath you give up is part of your life. Your soul, you Idrians would say. When you awaken something, it becomes part of you. If you're good and practice, the things you awaken will do what you expect them. They're part of you. They understand, just like your hands understand what you want them to do.
I'll start practicing then.
You should pick it up fairly quickly. You're a clever woman, and you have a lot of breaths.
That makes a difference?
The more breaths you hold when you start, the easier it is for you to learn how to awaken. It's like, I don't know, the breath is more part of you, or you're more part of it.
Thank you.
What? For explaining awakening? Half the children on the streets could have told you that much.
No, though I appreciate the instruction. The thanks is for other things. For not condemning me as a hypocrite. For being willing to change plans and take risks. for protecting me today.
Last I checked, those were all the things a good employee should do. At least if that employee is a mercenary.
It's more than that. You're a good man, Denth.
Denth met her eyes, and she could see something in them, an emotion she couldn't describe. Again, she thought of the mask he wore, the persona of the laughing, joking mercenary. That man seemed just a front when she looked into those eyes and saw so much more.
A good man? Sometimes I wish that was still true, Princess. I haven't been a good man for some years now.
Vivenna opened her mouth to reply, but something made her hesitate. Tonk Fa entered a few moments later. Denth stood up without glancing at her.
Well?
Looks safe. How's the stiff?
Just finished.
Jules leaned down.
Howl of the sun.
Claude started moving again, sitting up, looking about. Vivenna waited as his eyes passed over her, but there didn't seem to be recognition in them. He wore the same dull expression.
Of course. He's lifeless after all.
Jules had said something to make him start working again. It was probably the same one Jules had used to make him stop moving in the first place. That odd phrase, howl of the sun. Vivenna filed it away, then followed as they left the building. A short time later, they were home. Parlin rushed out. He went to Jules first, though she brushed him off. As Vivenna entered the building, he moved up to her.
Vivenna, what happened?
Vivenna just shook her head and started moving up the stairs.
There was fighting. I heard about it.
There was an attack on the camp we visited. A squad of lifeless. They started killing people.
Lord of colours. Is Jules all right?
Why do you ask about her?
I think she's nice.
Should you be saying things like that? Aren't you engaged to me?
You were engaged to the God King, Vivenna.
But you know what our fathers wanted.
I did, but, well, when we left Idris, I figured we were both going to get disinherited. There's really no reason to keep up the charade. I mean, let's be honest, Vivenna. You really haven't ever been that nice to me. I know you think I'm stupid. I guess you're probably right. But if you really cared, I figured that you wouldn't make me feel stupid too. Jules grumbles at me, but she laughs at my jokes sometimes. You've never done that.
But why did you follow me down to Halondran?
Well, for Ciri, of course. Isn't that why we came here? To rescue her?
Parlin smiled fondly, then shrugged.
Good night, Vivenna.
Parlin trailed down the steps, looking for Jules to see if she was hurt. Vivenna watched him go.
He's twice the person I am. But I'm just finding it hard to care anymore.
Everything had been taken from her. Why not Parlin, too? Her hatred for Halondran grew a little more firm as she stepped into her room.
I just need to sleep. Maybe after that I can figure out just what in the name of the colours I'm doing in this city.
One thing remained firm. She was going to learn how to awaken. The Vivenna from before, the one who had a right to stand tall and denounce breath as unholy, no longer had a place in Tae'Telir. The real Vivenna hadn't come to Halondran to save her sister. She'd come because she couldn't stand being unimportant. She'd learn. That was her punishment. Inside her room, she walked over to pull the drapes closed. A figure stood on her balcony, resting easily against the railing. He wore several days' worth of stubble on his face, and his dark clothing was worn, almost tattered. He carried a deep black sword.
You are causing a lot of trouble.
Vivenna opened her mouth to scream, but the drapes snapped forward. They wrapped around her entire body, pinning her arms to her sides. Vivenna struggled, hoping someone would hear her thrashing and come for her, but nobody did. At least, not before she fell unconscious. Lightsong watched the young queen dart away from his pavilion and felt an odd sense of guilt.
How very uncharacteristic of me.
He hadn't expected such a reaction from the queen. What was the God King to her? She'd been sent to be his bride, probably against her will, yet she seemed to take the prospect of his death with apparent grief. He eyed her appraisingly as she fled. Such a small young thing she was, all dressed up in gold and blue.
Young. Yet she's been alive longer than I have.
Lightsong retained some things from his former life. such as his perception of his own age. He didn't feel like he was 5, he felt far older. That age should have taught him to hold his tongue when speaking of making widows out of young women. Could the girl actually have feelings for the God King? She'd only been in the city for a couple of months, and he knew, through rumors, what her life must be like. Forced to perform her duty as a wife for a man to whom she could not speak and whom she could not know. A man who represented all the things that her culture taught were profane. The only thing Lightsong could suppose, then, was that she was worried about what might happen to her if her husband killed himself. A legitimate worry. The Queen would lose most of her stature if she lost her husband. Lightsong nodded to himself, turning to look down at the arguing priests.
We must prepare ourselves for war. Recent events make it clear that we cannot coexist with the Idrians with any assurance of peace or security. This conflict will come whether we wish it or not.
Lightsong sat listening, tapping one finger against the armrest of his chair.
For 5 years, I've been irrelevant. I didn't have a vote on any of the important court councils. I simply held the codes to a division of the lifeless. I've crafted a divine reputation of being useless.
The tone below was even more hostile than it had been during the previous meetings. That wasn't what worried him. The problem was the priest spearheading the movement for war. Nanrova, High Priest of Stillmark the Kind. Normally, Lightsong wouldn't have bothered paying attention. Yet Nanrova had always been the most outspoken against war. What had made him change his mind? It wasn't long before Blushweaver made her way to his box. By the time she arrived, Lightsong's taste for the wine had returned, and he was sipping thoughtfully. Blushweaver sat beside him amidst a cloud of perfume. Lightsong didn't look toward her.
How did you get to Nanrova?
I didn't. I don't know why he changed his mind. I wish he hadn't done it so quickly. It seems suspicious. It makes people think I manipulated him. Either way, I'll take the support.
You wish for war so much.
I wish for our people to be aware of the threat. You think I want this to happen? You think I want to send our people to die and to kill?
Lightsong looked at her, judging her sincerity. She had such beautiful eyes. One rarely noticed that, considering how she proffered the rest of her assets so blatantly.
No, I don't think you want war.
Blushweaver nodded sharply. Her dress was sleek and trim this day, as always, but it was particularly revealing up top, where her breasts were pressed up and forward, demanding attention. Lightsong looked away.
You're boring today.
I'm distracted.
We should be happy. The priests have almost all come around. Soon there will be a call for an attack made to the main assembly of gods.
Lightsong nodded. The main assembly of gods was only called to deliberate in the most important of situations. In that case, they all had a vote. If the vote was for war, the gods with lifeless commands, gods like Lightsong, would be called upon to administrate and lead the battle.
You've changed the commands on Hopefinder's 10,000?
They are mine now, as are Mercy Stars.
Blushweaver settled back in her chair, eyeing the small one that Ciri had vacated.
I am annoyed, however, at Allmother.
Because she's prettier than you? Or because she's smarter?
Blushweaver didn't dignify that with a verbal response. She just shot him a look of annoyance.
Just trying to act less boring, my dear.
Allmother controls the last group of lifeless.
An odd choice, don't you think? I mean, I am a logical choice, assuming you don't know me, of course, since I'm supposedly bold. Hopefinder represents justice, a nice mix with soldiers. Even Mercy Star, who represents benevolence, makes a kind of sense for one who controls soldiers. But Allmother? Goddess of matrons and families? Giving her 10,000 lifeless is enough to make even me consider my drunk monkey theory.
The one who chooses names and titles of the returned?
Exactly. I've actually considered expanding the theory. I am now proposing to believe that God, or the universe, or time, or whatever you think controls all of this, is all really just a drunk monkey.
Blushweaver leaned over, squeezing her arms together, seriously threatening to pop her bosom out the front of her dress.
And you think my title was chosen by happenstance? Goddess of honesty and interpersonal relations? Seems to fit, wouldn't you say?
My dear, did you just try to prove the existence of God with your cleavage? You'd
be surprised at what a good wriggle of the chest can accomplish.
I'd never considered the theological power of your breasts, my dear. If there were a church devoted to them, perhaps you'd make a theist out of me after all. Regardless, are you going to tell me what specifically All-Mother did to annoy you?
She won't give me her lifeless commands.
Not surprising. I hardly trust you, and I'm your friend.
We need those security phrases, Lightsong.
Why? We've got 3 of the 4. We dominate the armies already.
We can't afford infighting or division. If her 10 were to turn against our 30, we'd win. But we'd be left badly weakened.
Surely she wouldn't do that.
Surely we'd rather be certain.
Very well then. I'll talk to her.
That might not be a good idea.
Lightsong raised an eyebrow.
She doesn't like you very much.
Yes, I know. She has remarkably good taste. Unlike some other people I know.
Do I need to wriggle my breasts at you again?
No, please. I don't know if I'd be able to stand the theological debate that would follow.
Lightsong glanced toward the other side of the court arena where Ciri had paused to look out over the arena, her arms resting on the stonework. It was too high for her to do so comfortably.
Perhaps it wasn't thinking of her husband's death that bothered her. Maybe it was because the discussion turned to war.
A war her people couldn't win. That was another good reason why the conflict was becoming inevitable. When one side had an unbeatable advantage, war was the result. Halandren had been building its lifeless armies for centuries, and the size was becoming daunting. Halandren had less and less to lose from an attack. He should have realized that earlier, rather than assuming this would all blow over once the new queen arrived. Lightsong noticed that Blushweaver had noticed his study of Ciri. She was watching the queen with obvious dislike.
Do you know anything about a tunnel complex beneath the Court of Gods?
Sure. Some of the palaces have tunnels beneath them. Places for storage and the like.
Have you ever been down in any of them?
Please. Why would I go crawling about in storage tunnels? I only know about them because of my high priestess. When she joined my service, she asked me if I wanted mine connected to the main complex of tunnels. I said I didn't.
Because you didn't want others to have access to your palace?
No, because I didn't want to put up with the racket of all that digging. Can I have some more wine, please?
Ciri watched the proceedings for quite a long time. She felt a little like Lightsong said he did. Because she didn't have a say about what the court did, it was frustrating to pay attention. Yet she wanted to know. The arguments of the priests were, in a way, her only connection to the outside world. She was not encouraged by what she heard. As the time passed, the sun falling close to the horizon and servants lighting massive torches along the walkway, Ciri found herself feeling more and more daunted. Her husband was probably either going to be killed or persuaded to kill himself in the upcoming year. Her homeland, in turn, was about to be invaded by the very kingdom her husband ruled. Yet, he could do nothing to stop it because he had no way to communicate. Ciri needed to find a way to help Susebron. In doing so, perhaps she could bring him out from beneath the oppressive control of the priests. Then he might be able to do something to help her homeland. As she followed that line of thought, she almost missed a comment from below. It was spoken by one of the priests most strongly in favor of attacking.
Have you not heard of the Idrian agent who's been causing havoc in the city? The Idrians are preparing for the war. They know that a conflict is inevitable, and so they've begun to work against us.
Idrian agents in the city?
Ah, the infiltrator you speak of is said to be a princess of the royal family. That's obviously a story for the common people. Why would a princess come in secret to Taitalian? These stories are ridiculous and unfounded.
Ciri grimaced. That, at least, was obviously true. Her sisters were not the types to come and work as Idrian agents. She smiled, imagining her soft-spoken monk of a sister, or even Vivenna, in her prim outfits and stony attitude, coming to Taitalir in secret. Part of her had a little trouble believing that Vivenna had really been intended to become Susebron's bride. Starchy Vivenna? Having to deal with the exotic court and the wild costumes? Vivenna's stoic coldness would never have coaxed Susebron out of his imperial mask. Vivenna's obvious disapproval would have alienated her from gods like Lightsong. Vivenna would have hated wearing the beautiful dresses and would never have appreciated the colors and variety in the city. Ciri might not have been ideal for the position, but she was slowly coming to realize that Vivenna hadn't been a good choice either. A group of people was approaching along the walkway. Ciri remained where she was. She was too distracted by her thoughts to pay much attention.
Are they talking about a relative of yours?
Behind Ciri stood a dark-haired goddess wearing a lavish and revealing gown of green and silver. Like most of the gods, she stood a good head taller than a mortal person, and she looked down at Ciri with a raised eyebrow.
Oh, Your Grace?
They're discussing the famous hidden princess. She'd be a relative of yours if she really does have the royal locks.
They must be mistaken. I'm the only princess here.
The stories of her are quite pervasive. My Lightsong has taken a liking to you, princess.
He has been very kind to me. Might I ask which goddess you are, Your Grace?
I am Blushweaver.
I am pleased to meet you.
No, you aren't. I don't like what you're doing here.
Excuse me?
He's a better man than any of us, princess. Don't you go spoiling him and pulling him into your schemes.
I don't know what you mean.
You don't fool me with your false naivete. Lightsong is a good person, one of the last ones we have left in this court. If you taint him, I will destroy you. Do you understand?
Ciri nodded dumbly.
Find someone else's bed to climb into, you little slut.
By the time she got back to the palace, Ciri was quite ready for her bath. She entered the bathing chamber, letting her servant women undress her. They retreated with the clothing, then exited to prepare the evening's gown. That left Ciri in the hands of a group of lesser attendants, the ones whose job it was to follow her into the massive tub and scrub her clean. Ciri relaxed and leaned back as the women went to work. For a few moments, Ciri floated and let herself forget the threats to her people and her husband. She even let herself forget Blushweaver and her snappish misunderstanding. She just enjoyed the heat and the sense of the perfumed water.
You wanted to speak with me, Princess?
Oh! Bluefingers, I thought we'd clear this up on the first day.
Bluefingers stood at the rim of the tub, fingers blue, typically anxious as he began to pace.
Oh, please, I have daughters twice your age. You sent word that you wanted to talk to me. Well, this is where I will talk, away from random ears. What did you mean by claiming to have information relating to my plans?
Ciri bit her lip, sorting through the dozens of ideas she had considered, discarding them all. What did she know? How could she make Bluefingers willing to trade?
He gave me clues. He tried to scare me into not sleeping with the king, but he had no reason to help me. He barely knew me. He must have other motives for not wanting an heir to be born. What happens when a new God King takes the throne?
So, you figured that out then?
Figured what out? Of course I have.
Of course. Of course. Then you can see why I'm so nervous. We worked hard to get me where I am. It isn't easy for a Pancall man to rise high in the theocracy of Halandren. Once I got into place, I worked so hard to provide work for my people. The serving girls who wash you, they have far better lives than the Pancall who work the dye fields. That will all be lost. We don't believe in their gods. Why would we be treated as well as people of their own faith?
I still don't see why it has to happen.
Of course it doesn't have to, but tradition is tradition. The Halandren are very lax in every area but religion. When a new God King is chosen, his servants are replaced. They won't kill us to send us into the afterlife along with our Lord. That horrid custom hasn't been in effect since the days before the Many War, but we will be dismissed. A new God King represents a fresh start. But I guess my job security is the lesser of our problems.
Don't tell me you're worried about my safety above your own place in the palace.
Of course not. But the God King's life, well, that worries me.
So, I haven't been able to decide yet. Do the God Kings give up their lives willingly once they have an heir, or are they coerced into it?
I'm not sure. There are stories spoken of by my people regarding the last God King's death. They say that the plague he cured, well, He wasn't even in the city when the curing happened. My suspicion is that they somehow coerced him to give up his breaths to his son, and that killed him.
He doesn't know. He doesn't realize that Susebron is a mute. How closely have you served the God King?
As close as any servant considered unholy. I'm not allowed to touch him or speak to him. But, Princess, I've served him all my life. He's not my god, but he's something better. I think these priests look upon their gods as placeholders. It doesn't really matter to them who is holding the station. Me? I've served His Majesty for my entire life. I was hired by the palace as a lad, and I remember Susebron's childhood. I cleaned his quarters. He's not my god, but he is my liege. And now these priests are planning to kill him, but there's nothing to be done.
Yes, there is.
I gave you a warning, and you ignored it. I know that you've been performing your duties as a wife. Perhaps we could find some way of making certain that no pregnancy of yours comes to term.
I would never do such a thing. Austri forbids it.
Even to save the life of the God King? But of course, what is he to you? Your captor and imprisoner. Yes, perhaps my warnings were useless.
I do care, Bluefingers, and I think we can stop this before it gets to the point of worrying about an heir. I've been talking to the God King.
What?
I've been talking to him. He's not as heartless as you might think. I don't think this has to end with him dying, or your people losing their place in the palace. I'll make certain your people are cared for.
And my side of the bargain?
If things don't turn out as I want them to, I want you to get Susebron and me out of the palace.
Deal. But let us make certain it does not come to that. Is the God King aware of the danger from his own priests?
He is. In fact, he knew about it before I did. He's the one who told me I needed to contact you.
He did?
Yes. I will be in touch on how to make this turn out well for all of us. And until then, I would appreciate it if you'd let me get back to my bath.
Vivenna awoke sore, tired, and terrified. She tried struggling, but her hands and legs were tied. She only succeeded in rolling herself into an even less comfortable position. She was in a dark room, gagged, her face pressing awkwardly against a splintered wood floor. She still wore her skirt, an expensive foreign one like those that Denth complained about. Her hands were tied behind her. Someone was in the room with her. Someone with a lot of breath. She could feel it without even trying. She twisted, rolling onto her back in an awkward motion. She could see a figure silhouetted against a starlit sky, standing on a balcony a short distance away. It was him. He turned toward her, face shadowed in the unlit room. What was this man planning to do with her? Horrible possibilities leaped to mind. The man walked toward her. He knelt down, pulling her head up by the hair.
I'm still deciding whether or not to kill you, Princess. If I were you, I'd avoid doing anything more to antagonize me.
Vivenna froze in his grip, trembling, hair bleached white. He appeared to be studying her. He dropped her back to the wooden floor. He lit a lantern, then pushed the balcony doors closed. He reached to his belt and removed a large hunting dagger. Vivenna felt a stab of fear, but he simply walked over and cut the bonds on her hands. He tossed the dagger aside. He reached for something on the bed, his large, black-hilted sword. Vivenna scrambled back, hands free, and pulled at her gag, intending to scream. He whipped the scabbard sword toward her, making her freeze.
You will remain quiet.
Vivenna huddled back into the corner. Why hadn't she fled back to Idris long ago? The man, Vasher, stepped forward. He undid the clasp on that deep, black sword, and Vivenna felt a strange nausea strike her. A thin wisp of black smoke began to curl up from the blade. Vasher approached, backlit by the lantern. Then he dropped the sword to the floor in front of Vivenna.
Pick it up.
What?
Pick up the sword, princess.
She reached for the sword, but felt her nausea grow far stronger. Vivenna shied away.
Pick it up!
Vivenna grabbed the weapon. Vivenna felt a terrible sickness travel like a wave up her arm and into her stomach.
Hello. Would you like to kill someone today?
Vivenna dropped the horrid weapon and fell to her knees. She crawled away and huddled down against the wall again. Through teary eyes she watched as Vasher stood quietly. He picked up the sword. He clicked the clasp on its sheath, locking the weapon back inside.
We are in one of the slums. You may scream if you wish, but nobody will think anything of it. Except me. I'll be annoyed. I warn you, I'm not known for my ability to keep my temper.
Vivenna still felt hints of nausea. This man held even more breath than she did. Yet, when he'd kidnapped her, she hadn't felt anyone standing in her room. How had he hidden it? And what was that voice? Suddenly he was walking toward her again. She was trying to scramble away. He put a foot on her back and forced her down against the floor. Vasher tied her hands again before forcing on the gag. Vasher stood, then slung her over his shoulder and carried her out of the room.
Callous, cursed slums. Everyone's too poor to afford cellars.
Vasher pushed her into a second, much smaller room and tied her hands to the doorknob. He stepped back, looking her over, obviously unsatisfied. Then he knelt beside her, unshaven face close to hers, breath vile.
I have work to do. Work that you have forced me to do. You will not run. If you do, I'll find you and kill you. Understand?
Vivenna nodded weakly. She caught sight of him retrieving his sword from the other room, then he quickly rushed down the stairs. An hour or so later, Vivenna had finished crying herself dry. She sat slumped, hands tied awkwardly above her. Part of her kept waiting for the others to find her. Denth, Tongfa, Jules. They were experts. They'd be able to save her. No rescue came. Dazed, drowsy, and sick though she was, she realized something. This man, this Vasher, was someone that even Denth had feared. Vasher had killed one of their friends some months before. He was at least as skilled as they were.
How did they all end up here, then? It seems an unlikely coincidence.
Perhaps Vasher had followed Denth to the city and was acting out some kind of twisted rivalry by working against them.
Maybe they'll find me and save me.
But she knew that they wouldn't. Not if Vasher were as dangerous as they said. He'd know how to hide from Denth. If she were going to escape, she'd have to do it herself. The concept terrified her. Strangely, however, memories from her tutors returned to her.
If a person kidnaps you, your best time to escape is near the beginning, when you are still strong. They will starve you and beat you so that soon you'll be too weak to flee. Do not expect to be rescued, though friends will undoubtedly be working to help you. Never expect to be redeemed for a ransom. Most kidnappings end in death. The best thing you can do for your country is try to escape. If you don't succeed, then perhaps the captor will kill you. That is preferable to what you might have to endure as a captive. Plus, if you die, the kidnappers will no longer have a hostage.
It was a harsh, blunt lesson, but many of her lessons had been like that. Better to die than to be held captive and used against Idris. The tutors were right. The only chance she had to escape was now. Her hands were bound tightly. She'd tried pulling them free several times already. Vasher knew his knots. Blood began to drip down her wrist, but even that slickness wasn't enough to get her hands free. She couldn't wiggle her way out, but could she perhaps make the ropes untie themselves? It was useless. Even she knew that the commands had to be spoken clearly. She began to wiggle her chin, pushing on the gag with her tongue. She worked at it, moving her lips and her teeth. She was actually surprised when it finally dropped loose below her chin.
Now what?
Now she really needed to get free. If Vasher returned and saw that she'd managed to work her gag off, He'd never leave her with such an opportunity again. He might punish her for disobeying him.
Ropes. Untie yourself.
Nothing happened. Vivenna gritted her teeth, trying to remember the commands that Denth had told her.
Hold things and protect me.
Neither seemed all that useful in this situation. However, he had said something else. Something about imagining what you wanted in your mind. She tried that, picturing the ropes untying themselves.
Untie yourselves.
Vivenna leaned her head back in frustration.
I have to get this. I must figure it out. If I don't, I will be killed.
Vivenna opened her eyes, focusing on her bonds. She pictured them untying again, but somehow that felt wrong. She was like a child, sitting and staring at a leaf, trying to make it move just by concentrating on it. That wasn't the way her newfound senses worked. They were part of her. So, instead of concentrating, she relaxed, letting her unconscious mind do the work. A little like she did when she changed the color of her hair.
Untie.
The breath flowed from her. It was like blowing bubbles beneath the water, exhaling a piece of herself but feeling it flow into something else. That something else became part of her, a limb she could only slightly control. It was more of a sense of the rope than an ability to move it. As the breath left her, she could feel the world dull, colors becoming slightly less bold, the wind a little more difficult to hear, the life of the city a little more distant. The ropes around her hands jerked, causing her wrists to burn. Then the ropes unraveled and dropped to the ground.
Ostri, Lord of Colors, I did it!
Vivenna wasn't certain whether to be impressed or ashamed. Either way, she knew she needed to run. She untied her ankles, then scrambled to her feet, noticing that a section of the wooden floor had been completely drained of color in a circular pattern around her hands. She paused only briefly, then grabbed the rope and ran down the stairs. She peeked out the doorway onto the street, but it was dark, and she could see little. Vivenna rushed out into the night. She walked aimlessly for a time, trying to put space between herself and Vasher's lair. She knew that she should probably find a place to hide, but she was afraid. She was distinctive in her fine dress and would be remembered by all who passed. Her only real hope was to get out of the slums and into the city proper, where she could find her way back to Denth and the others. She carried the rope tucked into the dress's pocket pouch, hidden behind a fold of cloth on the side. She'd grown so accustomed to having a certain amount of breath that missing a fraction, even the smallest bit contained in the rope, felt wrong. Awakeners could recover breath they invested into objects. She'd been tutored on that. She just didn't know the commands to do it. So she brought the rope, hoping that Denth would be able to help her recover its breath. She maintained a quick pace, head down, trying to watch for a discarded cloak or piece of cloth she could wrap around herself to hide the dress. It was just beginning to grow light with morning's arrival, but it was still dark enough that she had trouble telling which direction she was going. The slums were convoluted enough that she felt she was going in circles. Tall buildings loomed around her, blocking off the sky. This area had once been much more rich. The shadowed fronts of the buildings held worn engravings and faded colors. The square down the street to her left held an old, broken statue of a man atop a horse, perhaps part of a fountain, or... Vivenna stopped. A broken statue of a horseman. Why did that seem familiar?
Denth's directions, when he explained to Parlin how to get from the safe house to the restaurant.
That day, weeks back, seemed so vague to her now. But she did remember the exchange. She'd been worried that Parlin would get lost. For the first time in hours, she felt a sense of hope. The directions had been simple. Could she remember them? After just a few minutes, she realized that the dark street around her looked familiar. There were no lamps in the slums, but the light of false dawn was enough. She turned around, and sure enough, the safe house lay huddled between two larger buildings across from her.
Blessed Ostri!
Vivenna quickly crossed the street. The main room was empty, and she hurriedly opened the door down to the cellar, seeking a place to hide. She walked down the steps carefully, feeling them creak beneath her. She made it down all right. At the bottom, she wrinkled her nose at the musty scent.
Oh!
The carcasses of several small game hung on the wall. Someone had been here recently, which was a good sign. She rounded the stairs. The main space of the cellar was built beneath the floor of the upper room. She would rest here for a few hours, and if Denth didn't arrive, she'd venture out. Then she... The lantern's unsteady light shone on a figure sitting before her, head bowed, face shadowed. His arms were tied behind his back, and his ankles were bound to the legs of the chair.
Parlin?
Vivenna quickly set down the lantern, then froze. There was blood on the floor.
Parlin!
She urgently lifted his head. His eyes stared forward, sightless, his face scratched and bloody. Her life sense couldn't feel him. His eyes were dead.
Oh, colors, 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 colors!
A hand fell on her shoulder. A large figure stood in the darkness behind her, half hidden beneath the stairs.
Hello, Princess.
Vivenna stumbled back, nearly colliding with Parlin's body. Only then did she notice the bodies on the walls, not game animals. What she had mistaken for a pheasant in the dim light of her lantern now reflected back green, a dead parrot. A monkey hung beside, body sliced and cut. The freshest corpse was that of a large lizard. All had been tortured.
Oh, Ostri!
Tongfa stepped forward, grabbing for her, and Vivenna finally shocked herself into motion. Vivenna ducked to the side, escaping his reach. She ran around the large man, scrambling toward the stairs. She came up short as she collided with someone's chest.
Do you know what I hate most about being a mercenary, Princess? Fulfilling the stereotypes. Everyone assumes that they can't trust you. And the thing is, they really can't.
We do what we're paid to.
It's not exactly the most desirable work, but the money is good. I was hoping we wouldn't have to do this. Everything was going so nicely. Why did you run away? What tipped you off?
Denth pushed her forward with a careful hand, still holding her arm, as Jules and Claude moved down the steps behind him.
You've been lying to me the entire time! Why?
Kidnapping is hard work.
Terrible business.
It's better if your subject never even knows that they've been kidnapped.
Lennox!
Didn't do what we needed him to. Poison was too good a death for that one. You should have known, Princess. With as much breath as he held.
He couldn't have died from sickness. Ostri! He's dead. Parlin is dead. They killed him.
Don't look at him.
Denth delicately turned her head away from the corpse.
That was an accident. Listen to me, Princess. You'll be all right. We won't hurt you. Just tell me why you ran away. Parlin insisted not to know where you had gone, though we knew he spoke to you on the stairs right before you vanished. Did you really leave without telling him? Why? What made you suspect us? Did one of your father's agents contact you? I thought we'd found all those when we entered the city.
Vivenna shook her head dumbly.
This is important, Princess. I need to know. Whom did you contact? What did you tell the slumlords about me?
We wouldn't want to have to break anything. You Idrians, you break too easily.
What had once seemed light-hearted banter to her now seemed terrible and callous. Now that Denth had brought another lantern, she could see a couple of large sacks stuffed underneath the stairs. A foot was hanging out of one of them. The boot bore the crest of the Idrian army on its side. Her father had sent people to recover her. Denth had just found them before they found her. How many had he killed? Bodies wouldn't keep for long in this basement. Those two corpses must be relatively new, awaiting disposal somewhere else.
Why? You seemed like my friends.
We are. I like you, Princess. If it means anything, I really am sorry. Parlin wasn't supposed to die. That was an accident. But well, a job is a job. We do what we're paid to do. I explained this all to you several times, I'm sure you recall.
I never really believed.
They never do.
Vivenna twisted her arm, slapping it against the back of Tongfa's cloak.
Grab!
Denth, however, was too fast. He yanked her back, covered her mouth, then snatched her other hand, holding it tightly. Tongfa stood surprised as Vivenna's dress bled free of color, turning gray, and some of her breath through Denth's fingers and into Tongfa's cloak. Yet without a command, that breath couldn't do anything. It had been wasted. Denth released her mouth and slapped Tonk Fa on the back of the head.
Pay attention!
Denth glanced at Vivenna, holding her arm tightly. Blood seeped between his fingers from her wounded wrist. Denth froze, obviously seeing her bloodied wrists for the first time. The dark cellar had obscured them. He looked up, meeting her eyes.
Oh, hell! You didn't run from us, did you?
Huh?
Vivenna was numb.
What happened? Was it him? All right. It looks like my hand has been forced. Let's deal with that breath of yours, and then we can have a chat nicely like friends about what has happened to you.
Claude stepped up beside Denth, gray eyes staring forward, empty as always. Except, could she see something in them? Was she imagining it? Her emotions were so strained lately that she really couldn't trust her perceptions. Claude seemed to meet her eyes.
Now repeat after me. My breath to yours. My life becomes yours.
Vivenna looked up at him, meeting his eyes.
Howl of the sun.
What?
Attack Denth! Howl of the sun!
The blow threw Denth to the side and into Tonk Fa. Vivenna ducked past Claude, nearly tripping on her dress, and threw her shoulder into the surprised Jules. Vivenna scrambled up the stairs.
You let her hear the security phrase!
Jules gained her feet and followed Vivenna. The woman's foot broke through a step, however. Vivenna reached over, turning the latch on the door.
Won't hold them for long. They'll keep coming, chasing me, just like Vasher. God of colours. What am I going to do?
Vivenna rushed out onto the street, now lit by the dawn's light filling into the city, and ducked down an alleyway. Then, she just kept running. This time trying to pick the smallest, dirtiest, darkest alleyways she could. Warbreaker Part 2 is a graphic audio production. Copyright 2009 by Brandon Sanderson. All rights reserved. Recorded with the permission of the Othro and Dragonsteel Entertainment, LLC. Production copyright 2009 by the Cutting Corporation. All rights reserved. With performances by David Coyne, James Konachek, Tim Getman, Ren Casey, Elizabeth Jernigan, Colleen Delaney, Scott McCormick, Christopher Graybill, Richard Rowan, Mort Shelby, Terrence Azelford, Stephen Carpenter, Sonny Lasky, Eric Messner, Tom Simpson, Amanda Thickpenny, Andy Clements, Ken Jackson, and Nanette Savard. Adapted and directed by Johann Detweiler. Produced by Richard Rowan and Dwayne Beeman. Executive producers James Cutting, Mary Cutting, and Angie Cornett. Dialogue editing and graphic audio sound design by Johann Detweiler. Featuring original music composed and performed by Dan Smith and Johann Detweiler. If you enjoyed Warbreaker, be sure to look for R.A. Salvatore's Demon Wars Saga, available now in graphic audio at road stops everywhere at 1-800-670-5220 or at www.graphicaudio.net. Keep listening for exciting previews of other graphic audio material.
You would allow your beloved husband to be tortured for the sake of your outlaw adopted daughter? We will take his nose first, right to here. It makes for a gruesome sight indeed, and assures that poor Gravis will be forever an outcast.
Why would you be doing such a thing? And yourself claiming to be a man of God?
Why, you ask? Because of your daughter, foolish woman. Because your dear Jilly's evil alliance with the heretic Avalyn could bring about the end of the world. Why are we down here? Here is where I will find my answers. Get back! Would you like to see again the world of the living?
Yes, the girl. How sweet that capture will prove.
Perhaps I might find time to take pleasure with her before I present her to my superiors.
By the gods, who are you? A friend of Avalyn Despris and a friend of Bradward.
Oh! By the gods, good show! Oh, but you'll get your due, Francis the Fool! Find them! Search every passage and every room! All doors barred and guarded! Now! Now!
Don't miss R.A. Salvatore's Demon Wars Book 2, The Demon Spirit, Part 3. Available now from Graphic Audio.
Serrano Legacy, Book 7, Against the Odds, Part 1. In Graphic Audio.
What?
Hands on your head.
What's going on?
I have orders to separate you from the regular space service as of today.
I haven't done anything wrong.
Fleet has no place for your kind.
Suiza Esme, most recent rank 03, separated by order of Admiral Serrano? Grandmother, she double-crossed us.
Bad news.
What?
Pedro Origamos, Consoline's foreign minister. Mother, killed him.
Miranda, you can't expect me to let it go.
Damn and blast, Cecilia. The man had my husband killed. He was a despicable, slimy...
Leave the Familius. I'll take you.
Hull breach, report all starboard aft teams.
Sir, we've got a peak our chem scan doesn't identify. Something with a molecular weight of 16.
16? Lieutenant, didn't I tell you to look out for methane?
Emergency! We have a potentially explosive gas mix.
Sir, I'm scared. I can't just stand here.
Sure you can. Smartest thing you can do.
No! Don't leave me behind!
No! Don't!
If you can't find that graphic audio title you're looking for, go to www.graphicaudio.net, where you can order it in CD format or digital download. If you're on the road, call 1-800-670-5220. That's 1-800-670-5220. Or www.graphicaudio.net. And if you're looking for a great way to try out a different graphic audio series, check out our convenient and easy-to-store long-haul box sets that include 5 books of a series. Available only at www.graphicaudio.net.